Please join me in giving Chief Gordon Ramsay a warm Pachyderm Club welcome.
Well, thanks for having me today. This is my second visit, so I can't use my old jokes that I used last time, but I do want to say a special hello to my fellow Duluthian, Dick Schleiz up front, and he might get a kick out of this story. You know, we're talking about storms and Puerto Rico and the damage that it does. Well, I think it was 2013 in Duluth. We had 10 inches of rain in a very short amount of time, and it was a 500-year flood. And I got a call at about 11 o'clock that they were going to start evacuating a part of the city because it was flooding. They were concerned that houses were going to be overcome with water. And so I said, okay, keep me up to speed. Well, about 1 a.m. I got a call back. They said, well, the zoo is now flooded, and there's seals on the road and whatnot. So I turned on the radio, and I could hear the officers they were, cops have really good sense of humor. They're laughing about the seal. One of the officers was bit by the seal that was on the road, and its name was Feisty, funny enough. And then as I got in the car and started driving in, passerbys had reported that the lions had gotten out of the den and were on a periphery fence line. So the supervisor at the scene sent in 3 teams of officers with rifles, and the only option, unfortunately, was they would have to euthanize the lions. Just there was no way. It was still heavy rain, lightning, very chaotic. And so the officers, I could hear them staging and going through the process. And then one of them got on the air and said, okay, I've got one of them on the back fence line, the northwest corner, and permission to dispatch. And he was given permission to dispatch. And apparently just then the lion turns its head, and the officer realized that it was just a Shetland pony and not a lion. And I am very, very thankful that he did not light up that poor little pony, because we would have been in big trouble. But those storms always have another side that you never hear about in the policing world and the things that occur. But well, anyhow, fortunately, we haven't had any big storms like that here, but we have been working very, very hard on a lot of the issues that policing face in today's world. Fortunately, when I got here, WSU had done an extensive study of the department and had put together a list of items that really needed to be focused on. And it was kind of a blueprint for me. I know the city manager, Bob Layton, had said that he wanted me to make sure that I focused on these issues as kind of the blueprint. The first issue really was community policing and race relations in the city. And when I did my research on the issues at the police department, it was apparent that there were some issues that had to be focused on. So my first year, we focused a lot on, like was said in the introduction, of pushing our officers back closer to the community. What I saw when I got here is that the officers had kind of withdrawn, right? A lot of, there is such scrutiny on police work in the country today that, officers do feel the pressure. I don't think there's any other, short of maybe the president, I don't think there's anything shorter than being a police officer and the amount of scrutiny they face in every decision they make. And the things that are very important to remember about our police officers is that they are standard issue people, right? And I have an affinity for police officers. I am really like cops and believe that the overwhelming majority of them are very, very good people that want to make a difference. But they are standard issue. When they go through the police academy, they do not undergo a metamorphosis that turns them into superhuman beings that are free from mistakes. And the reality is that they are like the rest of us in this room, and they make mistakes. And oftentimes in harrowing circumstances and in situations that nobody else can possibly relate to, and then they are quarterbacked on these situations after. And police officers' biggest worry today are, if I do make a wrong mistake with good intentions, what is the department going to do? How are they going to support me? And that's where we are in the world of police work. So what we are trying to do is get closer to the community so that people know our cops, know who they are. Also inviting the community in. One of the things in that WSU study that talked about was creating a citizen review board. That is, allowing citizens to come into the police department and look at our complaints. And I started one in Minnesota, and I'm a believer that it's good government. I believe that the investigations we do, internal investigations we do, are thorough and should be reviewed by people, right? And let people, citizens come in and poke, prod, pull back, ask questions, and make us better as a department. We have nothing to hide. So next month you will be seeing a city ordinance coming forward that will start the creation of a citizens review board. This board will review our complaints post-discipline, that is after I have issued discipline, but review those thoroughly and make recommendations on policy, training, and any issues that they may see pertinent to that complaint. Now, I am still the police chief, and I will administer discipline as I see fit. And I think if we get to the point where citizens are dissatisfied with the performance of the police chief in regard to officer discipline, then it's time for me to go. So the board will not have the authority to issue discipline, but they do have the authority to make recommendations and look at everything. And I believe that's good government. A couple other things that we've done. One of the things that I heard from several communities, particularly our minority communities, was that we investigate our own around criminal complaints. And I'll be honest with you, it is, I would rather not. And the sheriff and I had discussions when I first got here about having them investigate our domestic abuse complaints that involved police officers, where he would investigate ours and we would investigate his. As we were working through that, we began to talk about maybe just, why don't we just investigate each other on any criminal complaint? And the sheriff was all for it, and he's great to work with. We have a great relationship. So in January or February of this year, we signed an MOU where any criminal complaint against a Wichita police officer will be investigated by the sheriff and vice versa, so that it avoids concerns of conflict or friendships or relationships that may potentially taint a investigation. Now that is, we are probably the biggest city in the country that has such an agreement. Most police departments still investigate themselves. Most larger police departments still investigate themselves criminally. So, but I believe this is the direction that we should go, and I think it makes us better and gives us more credibility in the community. Another issue that came up was concern about police bias. You know, do they have bias that they don't know about? And the kind of the buzzword in policing today is implicit bias. You know, we all have our own biases, but how do we talk to officers and train them to recognize some of these biases that they may not recognize? We agreed, you know, a lot of people talk about the cookout we had last summer and how, you know, some people say, well, you placated people or whatever, but we did. This is one of the things that we agreed to at that meeting, was to train all of our staff on these implicit biases and fair and impartial policing. So starting in October, we will be training all 850 sworn and non-sworn staff on implicit bias training as part of in-service. Issues with gang lists and individuals that are on gang lists, and how do they get off, right? Because people are concerned about particularly youth that get identified as a gang member and put on a list that could potentially follow them throughout their life. And some strong feelings I have on kid issues, youth issues. You know, juvenile law was created because kids do impulsive things. They make bad decisions. As a matter of fact, I'm sure there's at least one or two of you in here, like me, made bad decisions as a juvenile. When we look back, it was like, yeah, I was impulsive, probably should have thought more about that, would never do it again today. But kids do those things. Kids join gangs sometimes and regret it later, and it can hurt them later in life. So we started meetings with the community on when someone has gotten out of a gang, how can they get off this gang list so that it doesn't haunt them down the road, as well as notification of parents. We were not notifying parents of kids that were put on the gang list. So we worked again to make sure that we're notifying parents and assist them with resources if they want to, if they so choose, to make sure that their kid is on track and that there's help available for them to get that kid back on track. And the last big thing that we did as far as community policing and race relations is we created community liaisons specializing in different areas of focus, such as the deaf and hard of hearing community. We hadn't liaisoned with them. Maybe some of you know about the recent shooting in Oklahoma City where a deaf man was shot and I believe killed by police this month. Very controversial. And what the chief has found down there is that his relationship with the deaf community has been stressed, and there was no pre-work early on in case a crisis did happen. So he is now playing catch-up. So we have assigned officers to different communities, deaf and hard of hearing. The mentally ill community, we have an officer that attends all their meetings with NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. I think everybody here in the room probably realizes that we're in a crisis with mental illness, in not only here, but nationally. In 1990, there was legislative effort to push the state mental health beds closer to communities. There's been over 5,000 mental health beds that have been cut in the state. 5,000 since 1990. That money from the state hospitals was intended to go to localities to help your local communities address the issue with mental health, and that money never really came about. So a lot of the issues with homelessness is associated with mental illness, and now it falls squarely on the backs of police. Our cops are the de facto mental health workers. Probably about 30% of our police calls involve mental health. The jail, and the sheriff will tell you that he ranges from about 25 to 40% of his inmates at any given time are diagnosed with mental illness. So the state hospitals of the past, in many ways, our jail has become the state hospitals of today, and our cops are the social workers of the past. In many cases, we're dealing with mental health issues because we're the only government entity that's available after 5 o'clock, where you can dial a 3-digit number and get a government agent to respond. So our officers are often put in positions where they're probably not the best ones to be responding to situations. And my big concern as chief is if someone gets hurt that is mentally ill at the hands of police, fighting with police, or whatever. So we have assigned liaisons to deal with that community and address and work on issues and make sure that our policies are consistent with best practices, and that those with loved ones that are suffering from mental illness know that the police department cares and we're doing everything we can about mental illness. I'll go off on that a little bit because there has been cases here in the past where our police officers have shot and killed someone that is suicidal. Sometimes they are clearly justified, where the officers are being shot at or guns pointed at them. And other times it may be a little more gray, where a knife may be involved. Well, one of my focuses here has been on use of force. And I want our cops to go home at the end of their shift, right? You don't sign up to, when you become a police officer, to take bullets or take knives or anything. But I want to make sure they're trained to a high standard of how to de-escalate and use good tactics. When we look at a lot of police shootings nationally, they are justified. The buzzword that's in the police community is lawful but awful, right? The officer acted within the guidelines of the law, but it doesn't sit well with a lot of people. So locally, we have looked very closely at our training, and that when we do respond to incidents with people with the knives, do we have potentially, or other weapons, do we have weapons available to our officers that may not be lethal? That is, in the early 90s, when I first got into policing, I would have thought today there would be a weapon available that could incapacitate someone without killing them reliably. That's not the taser. That really still doesn't exist. But there is a growing cadre of less than lethal weapons that shoot projectiles. One is a beanbag round, another one is a foam round. So we rolled out beanbag rounds to every sergeant patrol car on the street this time last year, as well as we bought four foam round guns. And these foam rounds I had used in Minnesota with phenomenal success. They often will knock a person down, but the chance of them being severely injured with these foam rounds is minimal. So we bought those, and we've used the foam rounds and the beanbag rounds since we've put them out in the field about 7 times. These were times where officers likely could have used their firearm and shot the individual without any repercussions, right? These are deadly force, potentially, situations. The worst injury we've had is one guy had a broken wrist when the beanbag round hit his wrist when he was holding a knife. So we have used those successfully, and we're going to continue to expand that. But one issue that I deal with often is budget, right? So we've got a budget of $85 million. 92% is salary and benefits. Very simple budget for a small bring guys like me. It's mostly salary and benefits. The rest is pencil, cars, paper, ticket books. Sorry. Our training budget, we have to do a lot internally. Our training budget is $125,000. That was my same training budget that I had in Minnesota for 200 staff. It's 850 here. So keep in mind, in education, the recommendation for staff development is 2% of your budget should go back to training and development. That would put us at about 1.6 million or so compared to the 125,000 that we have. And the expectation from the community is that our cops are trained because we have such volatile situations and we have so much power where we can seize someone's property or seize them. And the reality is that our training budget is pretty small. So we have to get creative with how to find money to train our officers. Often we do it by training trainers internally and then training the whole department. But I want to make sure in these use of force situations that we do not become national news, that one of your loved ones is not killed because we haven't trained or given our officers the right equipment. Those keep me up at night. And I can tell you every officer involved shooting that I've been involved with, and unfortunately they seem to happen when I go on vacation. Like I was going into Edinburgh Castle with my 80-year-old dad, touring it. And as we're heading in, I get a phone call, and it was an officer-involved shooting. Needless to say, the castle wasn't as enjoyable because my mind was on that. Another time I was on an anniversary trip with my wife in Spain, and we had another serious incident. So these do take you out of your time and place, even when I'm away. And like I said, they keep me awake at night. And I want to make sure that we are training to the highest of standards for our officers. I am happy to say that we have not shot anybody who is suicidal. I believe that the community feels that if someone is suicidal, if someone wants to commit suicide on their own, that's fine. But when police do it, it upsets a lot of people. And there is something philosophically that just seems wrong with that. So about 7 times now, we have been on calls in the last year where I've responded, or where our officers have responded, and someone's been suicidal in their own place of residence. No one else is in with them. They don't come to the door. They don't want anything to do with us. Some of them have said, if you come to the door, I'm going to shoot you or kill you. Now, traditionally, we have gone into those houses. We will knock the door down and take them out. We've stopped doing that when there's no one else in danger. On those six, maybe 7 times now, we have not had any issues. Now, we do make sure that there's follow-up with social services, that there is at a later time. But we have left. We've left those houses. And that is a total change in policing philosophy from years past because of concerns about liability. So the concern has been, well, geez, if we leave this person and they commit suicide, we're liable. Well, we're really going to be liable if we break down the door and shoot them. And it's going to be a lot more costly. And I think when we recognize that legal liability concerns drive more legal liability concerns, we really need to be careful with what we do. So we've been spending a lot of time on the use of force and tactics in the department. Also in July of last year, all of the body cameras were put out citywide. And I'll tell you, it saves us a lot in complaints and investigation time and court time because the video is fabulous. Now, it doesn't show everything. You know, it's a one-dimensional view into a 3-dimensional world. But being next door to the internal affairs, I see people march in and they're angry and they come marching up and I want to file a complaint, and we let them watch the video. And 9 times out of 10, they're like, okay, thank you, and they kind of march out the door. It is extremely expensive, these body cameras. We're paying $380,000 a year in body camera storage fees. Because think about it, we do about 50,000 videos a month with our officers are collecting. 50,000 videos a month. And I want to find one, right? So imagine if I can't find the one that's on a use of force complaint. What's the critic's going to say, right? You're hiding it, you're covering it up. So we have to have a very robust system to find, track, catalog these videos, and we pay for it. There has not been any funding for these cameras, so I have had to find money in my budget to pay for them. What has been decided is that the sale of the helicopter is going to pay for them. So the helicopter is up for sale, and that should pay for them for probably a year and a half. After that, we're going to have to find another way to keep paying for these cameras. My hope is that, because they're so frequent now that the competition, different companies are making these cameras, that it will drive down costs. The technology is amazing. We are now trying out 12 cameras that are Bluetoothed to our holsters. That is, when a gun is unholstered, it automatically turns on that body camera. Because what have we seen nationally? Sometimes cops forget to turn them on, right? Imagine being a cop for 20 years and all of a sudden you got to remember to press that button. You're getting out of your car on a gun call or some hostile call, and you've done it the same way for 20 years. Now you got to remember to hit that camera, right? So it is something new, and I believe that in most cases officers have forgotten, not intentionally but unintentionally. We train them at the range now when they're shooting to tap their chest, tap their thing, to create that motor muscle memory to help them remember. But the technology is improving so that if there is an error and someone forgets, that will come on anyway. So gun holster, taser holster, light bar are all going to turn on the cameras automatically. Now, they got to test the tasers at the start of every shift, and they dry fire them. Now, that also turns on the cameras. So you got 20 guys in a room test firing these things. Every body camera is going to come on. So we're working through some of but we are kind of a test site for this new technology with this system. And I think it will make us all the better. As well as when we bought these cameras we have currently, there was a 30-second pre-record. So when they hit their button, recorded for the previous 30 seconds, but there was no audio associated with it. Now we can go back up to 2 minutes, and it can record audio. So we're trying out different things along those lines with the body cameras. So the technology is improving quite a bit. The traffic unit was another WSU study issue, and something I heard in a lot of communities was that the focus didn't seem to be on traffic like it used to. I drive Kellogg every day, and it could be its own reality TV show, The Drive on Kellogg, right, with what you see. And I've written a couple tickets myself on Kellogg, including the lady from a few weeks ago who flew past me at 90 as I was driving into work. But we do need to focus more on crashes. We have we've been averaging about 30 fatalities a year in traffic related, and that's too many. We have a lot of serious crash injuries that people survive, but that have to deal with complications throughout the rest of their life. And I want to see our crash rate go down instead of this creeping upward. And we all know what's driving a lot of the crashes is the distracted driving with the phones. And it is to the point now where it's almost an epidemic. I mean, you stop, when you're at the next intersection, stopped, put your phone down, look around you, and look at all the other people on the phone. Right? It's everywhere. I get worried about my young kids or me or my wife walking on the road if there's a sidewalk cross, because you see these people, they bounce off the curbs as they drive. They're as bad as a drunk driver. And I have never been one for a lot of laws, but I am at the point now where our current, it's hard to enforce, right? So with the current state law, if you can dial on your phone, you can do other things on your phone and hold it when you drive in Kansas, and it makes it difficult to enforce the texting law. I think we've come to the point now, and with the technology available, we should just go hands-free. And these new phones are all hands-free, and a lot of the cars have that Bluetooth technology. I think it would make a big difference as far as safety goes if we could get a law that focused on hands-free. I don't think it will happen anytime soon, but as your guy that wants to reduce accidents, I strongly believe it would. The other thing that's coming out is the speeders beware. The motorcycles are coming back. We have 8. This was on a state grant, a federal traffic highway grant that was funneled through the state. So we will have 8 motorcycles out probably in November or December, depending on the weather. And we've got 2 trainers right now out in Garden City being trained to train the rest of the staff. And they are a very potent enforcement tool. Motorcycles are. As a matter of fact, I was in Topeka it was last spring because school was still in, and was driving down the road, and everybody's going 20 miles an hour. I'm like, why is everybody going so slow? And then I see the school zone sign, and then I saw a motorcycle, and it was like staying away from a beehive or something. People saw this, and they clearly changed their behavior based on that presence. So be warned. The other big thing that we've worked on, I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, but it was a workload analysis, right? Are we staffed appropriately? This was in the WSU study based on citizen feedback, based on officer feedback. And I'll tell you, when I love to work the street, I love to go out and see the flavor out there, what people are seeing, how our policies are impacting our officers. And it is busy. The men and women on this police department work hard. And a few Fridays ago, I worked out east, and there was about 18 calls pending at 6 o'clock. That's 18 people waiting for calls to be answered. And I went on a call involving a burglary that had happened 3 hours prior. So the victim in this case was a middle-aged lady, and she had been waiting 3 hours. Initially, I think she was mad at the suspect who did this, but after 3 hours of waiting, she was mad at the police. And so for the first 15 minutes, this officer that I was with explained to her that the calls he was on involved domestic fights, people being hurt, and her call just was put down the chain until he was free. She did understand that, but it was clearly impacting her, that delay. And we have a lot of people, whether it's traffic accidents or property crimes, that are waiting excessive amount of time for police. So rather than me saying, and officers and everybody saying, I think we need more police, we hired a company to come in and dig into our data, our 911 calls, our calls, the amount of time that officers spend on calls, and how do we stack up. And there's national benchmarks, like for every 5 homicides, you should have at least 1 detective that they look at. So they looked at all of our statistics, all of our 911 calls, and they said, you probably should have about 49 additional officers and 24 support staff. We're at 650 sworn today. The high was in 2004, I found out recently, at 674. So we're 24 officers shorter than we were in 2004. But yet these demands and people's expectation of the police are changing substantially with the mental health issues, and just the level of service that people expect today is different than the past. So the city council right now is trying to figure out how to pay for this, because it's expensive. That's 73 or so additional staff on the police department. Where's the money going to come from? So that's one thing that the council is debating and trying to figure out. And I will tell you, I have tremendous support from the city council. They have been very, very good to me, as well as the city manager and the mayor, and understand that we need more staff. But the question is where's the money going to come from? Sales tax has been flat. Because a lot of the online purchasing. I read a recent article in, I think it was Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, brokered a deal with Amazon, where Amazon said, we estimate your annual sales tax is at $600,000, and we'll voluntarily pay Broken Arrow $600,000 a year in sales tax, which really appealed to me, because if you think Wichita, Broken Arrow is about 80,000 or whatever it is, and that would be a substantial amount of change if the city could broker a deal like that, because right now we're not getting anything from online sales. So not wanting to just go with my handout, I'm looking for ways to help pay for these additional officers. But the reality is that if we do not get them, we are going to have to change the way we do business. My efforts with community policing and assigning officers to neighborhoods and going to community meetings and planning community meetings and attending community events probably will have to go away, because our first mission is crime prevention, crime response. And if we can't meet that, which we're pretty close to it right now, we need to reevaluate how we're doing things. The workload analysis study is online if anybody ever would want to read it. Probably be good to read about 9:30 at night, and you would sleep very well through the evening. I guess one of the last issues I'll talk about and then take some questions is another item that was pointed out was our discipline within the PD. There was a lot of, this was from the WSU study, looking at best practices and how we do things. And one of my focuses is talking about officers when they are well-intended and their decision is wrong, that we are fair. The number one morale buster in police organizations is the perceived lack of fairness by administration. So I want to be fair and consistent. And what I saw looking through past files is that we weren't always fair and consistent, and some of it depended on who you were friends with in the department. So we have been working on putting together a matrix so that we are consistent with discipline. as well as putting together a program called education-based discipline, whereas throughout my career I see a lot of officers making mistakes, and it's not because of malice or any other reason other than that they weren't properly trained. And part of our focus on discipline is, have they received the training to make them where they should be? Should they have known better? So we've been working on an educational-based discipline angle as well. With that, take a few questions. Nothing's off the table. Feel free to shoot away at me and tell me what I'm doing wrong or what we need to be doing. Or go ahead.
Chief, the gangs. How many primary gangs are in Wichita, and are they influenced by the big dogs in Chicago or LA? And since your tenure, has their footprint decreased in size?
Question on gangs. It's very good. So we have a very strong gang culture here that goes back generations. We were talking yesterday, I was getting an update on some individuals that are problematic in a certain neighborhood, and it's the third generation of gang members that are causing it in this family. Gangs continue to be a problem. They are not as significant of a problem as they used to be. What we see is that there's a lot of intermingling between gangs. What has traditionally been blood territory or, name the gang, we see a lot of kind of commingling. We see hybrid gangs now, where there's kind of a mixture of different groups. We're seeing a resurgence in motorcycle gangs of all kinds. We're seeing some national motorcycle gangs that haven't had a foothold in Wichita show up here. All the gangs have one thing in common, and that is usually making money through illegal means. Traditionally, it's been drugs and burglaries. We're seeing now a human trafficking element to gangs, where they are running prostitution rings, more so than ever. And oftentimes, the women are locked in because of drug abuse or just plain old abuse, and they are essentially slaves. The more we find out about it, the more we are shocked at what is going on in that. It's in high school right now. We have some young high school boys that are trying to run prostitution rings because it's perceived as kind of a cool thing to do. And we are putting a lot of effort into it. The human trafficking complaints take a lot of time. It's not like a theft case where it's a 10-hour case. These things can go years investigating them because of the complexity. So the gang culture is changing. It still tends to be very violent, and we still see the same gangs that we saw in the 90s around. But it's probably, the gang violence has probably gone down over the years, especially since the 90s.
Yes. Thanks for coming, Chief. Appreciate your work that you do and all your officers. You talked about investigating the sheriff investigating. Is there some point at which the KDI gets involved? Tell us how that works.
Well, KDI doesn't have the staffing really to help us out much, and it really, we would be happy to have them do it as well. Officer-involved shootings, I would love if someone else handled the whole criminal investigation of officer-involved shootings, but the reality is KBI doesn't have the staffing here to help us out. So we're creating a joint team of different agencies in this area, and whoever's officers were involved in it will not be a part of the leadership of that team. So, but in Minnesota, we handed it off to the state, and I like that. It was clean. There was no ever concerns about us getting mixed up into how it was investigated, but it's a resource issue here.
Chief Ramsay, thanks for coming. Would you take a minute to talk about two aspects to this question? The opioid epidemic, legal and like Oxycontin, and illegal drugs, how Wichita compares at this point compared to other parts of the country. And a completely unrelated question, but important for your department, talk about the number of retirements of officers and vacancies within your department. Thank you.
Sure. Opiates right now, we're seeing an increase. That is heroin, drugs, also prescription drugs that are opiate-based. Keep in mind now with opiates, physicians that were trained prior to '85 were always trained that opiates are for people in hospice only because of the addictability. It's so addictive. Right now, 20% of everybody getting a opiate prescription in this country is on them a year later. If you're taking them for more than 3-4 weeks, you are going to be addicted to them. And what I've seen throughout, I saw this evolve throughout my career, the pill issue. I'd start getting, in the mid-90s, I'd get people complaining about their pills being stolen or people dealing in pills. And it was primarily prescription pills. And these opiates have, the amount of prescriptions that they're issuing, that physicians are issuing on these, where we were 20, 25 years ago, is almost hard to wrap your arms around. It is a major problem. And so there's a lot of people that are getting hooked on these, that are getting hooked on them through pain. And I've had doctors say, don't blame the doctors. This is driven by American society's desire to be pain-free. Don't blame the doctors. The other thing, remember, and this is where we've got, so when you dig into this issue a little more, one of the performance measures for physicians is pain management. So doctors are, if they get poor ratings because they're not giving out pills, that affects their pay and their overall performance ratings. So there should be some examination of how are we grading our doctors, and this seems to be counterproductive with what we're trying to do. In Wichita, we have arrested some doctors for overprescribing, going back to the mid-2000s, and I think that has helped. I think it's helped focus physicians on that we're watching them and they're going to be held accountable. But nationally, heroin I saw very little in the 90s. It was very rare. It was black, mostly came from Asia. Now all the heroin, every bit of it, is coming from Mexico. The former marijuana fields in Mexico are now full of poppies. And it's being managed by Mexican drug cartels, gangs. And they're making a fortune. And they're flooding the market with heroin. It is cheap. The one thing about Wichita is meth still is cheaper than heroin. So meth is still more of an issue than heroin is. Now, that may change because we know right here on I-35 there is pounds and pounds going by. Probably right now there's pounds driving by coming from Mexico. It's driven by money and drugs and gangs, or by gangs. So we have seen an increase in overdose, and we are focusing on it as much as we can. It is a concern. It also is a concern how people start. Very few people, my definition, working in the drug world, one of the things I found in the last 10, 15 years is that you're not a junkie until you shoot it in your arm. A lot of kids and young adults think, oh, I can take some of these pills, it makes me feel better, helps get me through the day, and then they're addicted, and then their prescription gets cut off or they can't get any more, and then they will go to smoking heroin, and the best way to get the best high is through injecting it. So eventually they get to IV form heroin use. But the perception in the drug culture is you're not a junkie until you shoot it in your arm. In Minnesota, heroin is huge. It is out of control. We had needles found in parks. There were people calling police to pick up needles in parks, and we were busy picking up needles in parks. Finally, we said, we need the fire department to help us. We can't keep picking up needles all day. I mean, we are very fortunate that it's not an issue here, but it's a much bigger problem than just enforcement. There needs to be more oversight of the amount of pills that are going out, who's getting them, what's being done with them. A lot of them are, okay, don't answer this, but I know a lot of you have prescription pills just stored in your closets. Get rid of them. We had a kid in Minnesota, he was driving around a new Cadillac Escalade, $75,000 vehicle. He funded it with his dead grandpa's oxys. He had saved up 6 years, got all these prescriptions, he never used them. And then grandma never threw them away. So he was selling them for $75 a pill and was able to buy this new Escalade, and it was quite a scene. So those pills aren't going to get rid of them. We're finding a lot of burglaries right now are being driven by word of mouth on large amounts of prescription pills in your house. So it is a problem, and people need to be aware of it. They need to be educated. If you get a prescription for these opiates, recognize that they are highly, highly addictive and that they can cause you problems down the road if you're using them for more than 3 weeks. On staffing, a lot of retirements, we kind of ebb and flow. Right now we have 20 vacancies through different retirements, people want another profession. Some people enter police work and they're saddened by what they see and they decide it's not for them. So there's a mixture of that. So we're kind of on line with where it's been historically average.
Have you seen the new cable television program Live PD, and what's your opinion of that, and would you like to see them come to Wichita?
Live PD wanted to come here. They had asked us before they started, and we didn't know what it would be like. We didn't know, it just made us a little nervous, and we said no. I have watched it a couple times, and I know there's a big following of it, and would potentially consider it if they wanted to. But yeah, Cops just was here. I think they're going to be starting to run their episodes soon. We were one of the first Cops cities in their TV show, and generally get good feedback on that. I'm not one to want to glamorize a lot of what we do, though, or put it out there publicly, right? We do catch people at their worst, which this is the body camera issue, right? So the state has not made it always that clear on what should be released. They still leave a lot on the hands of the city to determine what body camera footage should be released. And I'm of the opinion, unless it's a very high-profile crime that people should see, third-party obtaining copies of you at some of the worst moments in your life shouldn't be available just to anybody. They should be available to you. You should be able to come down and see them and give them to the media or whatever, but it shouldn't be an ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend, someone with an axe to grind that comes and gets the video of you at one of the worst moments in your life. And that's what we still grapple with this body camera video issue. Yes?
Over here, Joseph.
Yes, glad to see you here. Mine is more of a comment. I live in Derby, but I do a lot of volunteer work and associated with a lot of things in Wichita. And I wanted to let you know that since you arrived, the Northeast community is a lot calmer. The people talk about being able to, have you on speed dial almost, But I just wanted to know that I'm around a lot of people, and just thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks, Joseph. I appreciate it.
I see lots of hands in the air. I'm going to try to get to all of you. Through our community policing officers, I've been made aware that there's been an escalation in car thefts in the Wichita area. Is that probably continuing to escalate? And if so, what are we doing about it, or is it going away?
Thanks for asking that. I should have mentioned it. Probably one of the crime that impacts people in this room the most is thefts, and what we're seeing, probably the highest volume theft calls related to theft from vehicles. We have an enormous issue right now with people stealing from cars. Every neighborhood, every corner of the city, no one's immune. Some people feel a little more comfortable leaving valuables in their car. Some people forget. But the reality is people leave. I read every week the things that people are leaving in their cars, and I'm like, geez, no wonder people are doing this. Checkbooks, purses, laptops, iPads, guns. In the last 3 years, we've had almost 600 guns stolen from cars. We had 5 guns taken from the Warren Theater parking lot a few weeks ago. An individual leaves 5 guns in his car and doesn't lock the damn doors. So guess where those guns are, though, right? They're floating out now in the hands of criminals. And there are gun locks that you can get for your car if you have to leave your gun in your car, but that's a lot of guns out there. So theft from vehicles is a big one. But the other thing that's happening is this right here, the keyless fobs, right? A lot of people are leaving these darn things in their car, a lot. So the bad guys are, as they're digging through, seeing if there's anything of value in there, they're also putting their foot on the brake and pressing the button to see if the fob's in the car somewhere hidden. And a lot of times the car's starting because the fob is in the... I asked at a meeting last week, about half this size, how many people leave the fobs in their car? And there was 3 people that raised their hand. I won't ask it here because I think I kind of embarrassed them, but don't leave those darn things in your cars, guys.
Okay, thank you. I go to First Methodist Church downtown, and there's First Presbyterian, First Baptist, and the Cathedral. And we're having a rash of vandalism that's happening to the to the congregation on Sunday. And a friend of mine, Ken Holmes, just had his brand new Chrysler keyed on the side. And a lot of elderly people are afraid to go to church now. I notice the congregation is getting smaller and smaller. But I'm wondering if there's anything they can do about that. And about 2 months ago, Pastor Cindy Watson had a woman that came into church and started harassing her during a KTV live telecast. And they did their best to kind of cover it up. And we have a member in our church that was a former retired police officer, and he sat next to her and then another guy, and that's how they got through it. But are there beefed up security in the downtown on Sunday morning?
No. I'd like to. I have heard more and more issues mental health related, particularly in certain areas. One of my big concerns, right, is a lot of our issues with mental health and particularly around place. A lot of our crime is place specific. So we look at what draws people to certain areas. And we kind of have a concentration of high need services in a tightly compact area. So that draws people, right? And so because we didn't think about the planning of this, now I've got this sandwich that guess who gets blamed for it? The police. You guys got to do something about this now. Well, you know what? Maybe we should look at shrinking the size of some of these services and dispersing them a little bit throughout the city rather than have them in one concentrated area. Because this is the result of bad planning. I was just out in Denver. We were talking about homelessness and looking at their shelter. They have a shelter with 700 people in it. The problems around that shelter are enormous, and along the Riverwalk near there. They're looking at creating smaller shelters dispersed throughout the city. You put these high concentration services in an area, and I get the blame. And what we need to look at is, I'm not saying these aren't good services or needed services, because I think part of our mission in life is to help people in need, but we need to look at the results of when we do that, when we try and run 1,000 people through a day shelter. And what's the impact on the community? Well, it's going to be lower property values. You're going to have drinking. You're going to have fights. You're going to have public urination. And you're going to have people complaining to the police to do more. So this is not necessarily a police problem. I think we need some of the churches. We see churches having feeds in parking lots, right? So good, well-intended, needed, but we got to look at how we do this. NASCAR Park, right? So people go there throughout the week and they feed the homeless. We start having bags of clothes show up in NASCAR Park. People well-intended start dumping clothes. Well, guess what happens to the clothes? They end up all over the park and road. And we've got services in this city who are very good at helping people in need. They can distribute clothing, they can distribute food, but yet they try to get the people help, right? If it's help with chemical addiction, they try to get them help with that. If it's help with getting stabilized through mental health, they help with that. But this kind of parking lot feedings and dropping clothes off in the park only increases the problems for us. And it's the same with panhandling. I have people yelling, "You cops aren't doing anything about the panhandling." So the federal law changed based on a Supreme Court ruling that said, you know what, it's free and protected speech. We can no longer write someone for panhandling. But what we are doing is we've got an ordinance coming up that says, you know what, you can't panhandle at busy intersections because we have crashes. You can't stop and give money and stop traffic. You can't press the don't walk button to stop traffic when you're not planning on walking and your purpose is panhandling. So these are ordinances that are coming forward next month because of people are tired of it. But what happens is someone well-intended will come by and give someone a $20 or $30 bill. They wouldn't be panhandling if people would stop that. And the money often goes to booze and drugs. I'm not saying in all cases, but it often does. And we have these community service providers that could use that money to help get these people stabilized and on track. And this feeding in the parks and giving money to panhandlers is counterproductive to improving the problem. And it keeps coming back on the cops. And it's not necessarily a police problem in every case.
I think this might be our last question.
Okay.
What I'd like to ask is all of these issues that are brought up, and some of them are just kind of local, it goes in one ear, comes out the other. But is there a media, the news media and stuff like that, a program where that they could institute to help educate all of us on certain issues that we as individuals can collectively get together and improve our lives in this town and help the police department and that way there. I don't, you know, individually I don't do much, but collectively I think we can unite together. Is there any program that you've got thoughts in mind on?
We do. We've got some good reporters who work with us, but a lot of the time, so we had done a panhandling effort and, you know, talking about just what I mentioned. And, well, one of the news goes and finds a panhandler. He says, I've got a family and this is bull. And, you know, these are good people out here panhandling that need a, you know, and totally blew our whole story, even, and he was full of it, you know. But, so we do try. We also are trying to do more media stuff ourselves. We have our own YouTube channel. We do a lot through social media to get that unfiltered message out. But we find when we try to go through the media, unless it's the right reporter, and there's only a handful of them, it gets twisted and the message gets lost. As hard as we try. Yeah.
I lied, one more.
Okay, neighborhood police officer. Our neighborhood police officer we have a really good relationship with. Are you expanding anything on the neighborhood police officer programs and how they work and all that?
We're not expanding it. We want to continue to build on it and give those officers the time to spend time with neighborhoods. They've been pulled out the last few years because we're busy. They get sent on 911 calls. Their shifts get adjusted to fill vacancies. So we're trying to stabilize that so that they are there when you need them, as well as keep them in spots for longer. That's a contractual issue right now where our dedicated beat officers can switch when there's openings. So some neighborhoods we have, particularly out east, we have kind of almost a revolving door of community policing officers. The neighborhood just starts to get to know them and then someone comes in. I'd like to stabilize that, but it's a contractual issue I need to work through. But I'm very supportive of it and I want to enhance it, not pull it away. I want more officers. I want every officer to see their role as doing community policing, not just that guy.
Chief, you mentioned mental health. Can you give us an idea of what some other jurisdictions would be? What would you really like to see happen in Wichita County?
Well, I would like to see more help available for people that are suffering from mental illness. No one chooses to be mentally ill and homeless. The sad situations that we deal with daily, I think there just needs to be more focus on resources and funding for this important issue would help.
Chief Gordon Ramsay, let's give him a big hand. Big thank you.